Welcome back to another episode of Back to the Future, where we interview priests who have originated or had a tight connection with St. John's and are now out in the world, also responding to the challenges that we're facing.
Amen.
And it's a joy to welcome the Reverend Greg Brown with us today, who is the Vicar of Epiphany, Church of the Epiphany in Oak Park.
Oak Park,
Oak
California.
Park, California. And we're so glad to have you with us, Greg.
Yeah. Thanks for inviting me, Scott. It's fun to be back. It's always nice to remember the Bay Area, the place that I grew up in and lived a lot of my life in, and so it's wonderful to sort of revisit my old stomping grounds.
So tell people a little bit about what is your connection to St. John's?
Well, I think the way I tell the story often is this. When you go back through the generations, my family has been Episcopalian for a long time. And so I think, as most people do, when I was born, my parents, probably at the behest of my grandparents, excuse me, got me baptized. And then we didn't go to church. So Sunday mornings was a lot of eating leftovers from the dinner party last night and watching TV. And then, I don't know, I was probably 8 or 9. And I'm not sure why, but we started doing what I now recognize as church shopping. We would show up at a random church on Sunday and not go back. And after a few weeks, we found St. John's, and there were people I recognized because we lived nearby, and we just never left. I was probably 8 or 9. I was in 4th grade, and it just was wonderful to jump into this wonderful, welcoming community, and to build relationships as I grew up there that really have stood the test of time. I looked through the list of people you're interviewing, and at least half of them are still good friends, people I see, once or twice a year and keep up with. As an adult, when I came back from college, or a young adult, I suppose, I just kept going to St. John's and plugged myself in a bunch of different ways, learning and growing, giving back and realizing over probably 15 years a call to ministry. So St. John's is not only the place that I grew up and the place that my parents still go to, but and a place that gave a lot to me as I was a kid, as I was being formed, but also the place that supported me in my call to ordination. It's been a long journey since then. I probably left the Bay Area about a decade ago, and it's been a fun journey, but I miss it because it's home.
I always take the opportunity, especially when we do our confirmation retreats up at Bishop's Ranch, to go to that altar, that outdoor wood altar that a few of you built, and I turn it upside down and I say, this was this person was in your shoes one time, this person was in your shoes, and these are all priests now. So they said, wow, we're always amazed a little bit about how many people enter the priesthood who come out of St. John's.
It should be, since this is recorded, I want to make sure you understand that it was part of a summer camp project to build the altar, and we signed our names as the artists. That was not graffiti. So.
Oh no, I would never accuse you of that, Greg.
There are other things at the Bishop Ranch. I'll tell you those stories later. But
so tell us a little bit about how all of you at Epiphany are moving through this very challenging time.
There's a pretty full answer, and then there's another answer that is, I don't know,
Okay.
It really does seem like every day the ground shifts a little. There were a couple of weeks where every 2 days we got a different message. What was the right direction? What was the smart thing to do? Epiphany is a wonderful community of people. It's actually not very different from St. John's. It has done good work in forming children and in raising families, and in walking with people as they go through their careers into retirement. Epiphany is a little newer than St. John's. It was founded 40 years ago. as a new Oak Park is sort of a very far suburb of Los Angeles. It's near Thousand Oaks, if you know where that is, or if you know where the valley, where valley goers are from, it's sort of up the hill on the west side. And so it's a fairly affluent part of LA, and we want to do good ministry there. It was growing 40 years ago. And about 25 years ago, we built this beautiful church, and really have drawn people in our area by building relationships, but also by inviting people into things that are connected to the church but aren't grounded in the church in the same way. There's a group of people that runs a vineyard on our campus, and if you're a member of the vineyard, you get a little bit of wine every year, and you get to help press and stuff like that. There's a music guild that puts on beautiful renditions of things, and worship services every month. And so we had to have some hard conversations, as it was clear that, especially in LA, but as we heard news from the Bay Area, that people were at risk by gathering together. There was some real concern. And of course, the people that I'm connected with around the country sort of were talking about the same thing. And our bishop, the Bishop of Los Angeles, was similarly concerned. There was a window where we limited some practices to just see that we could not pass things on but still worship. And finally, about 6-7 weeks ago, the Bishops' Committee and I decided together that we were going to have to transition away from public assembly. One of the things that really, there are lots of things that put into it, like the school district decided that week to close the schools and stuff like that. But I think one thing that really sat with us was the very final public event that we had the very last public event we had before we decided to transition to virtual stuff, was our monthly meeting of our, elders group. We call it the Older, Wiser Laity, or the Owls. And they came together and celebrated St. Patrick's Day on probably the 12th of March. And we just looked around and saw so many people who really were not going to be able to handle being infected. We just didn't feel right assembling with them. And so there's this thread, one of the practices that we've taken on since going virtual is, a group of people, there's probably a dozen or 15 of them, calls through the directory every week, and I help them. And as I talk to people, I really hear a great spirit of sacrifice, that they're willing to kind of keep doing this as long as it takes so that someone they love doesn't get sick, someone in the parish or one of their neighbors or someone. And so it was a very easy choice to make, to see, the area isn't bad yet, but it could be inundated. And if we make this choice, we have to figure it out. And the sort of 4 weeks after we decided to go virtual were a lot of trial and error, and a lot of, doing things poorly once and then doing it better the next time. Because we've gone virtual, we use a lot of Facebook Live and a lot of Zoom to stay connected with people. Our main worship services are on Zoom. But we also use phones and stuff like that to check in with people. And every once in a while, we sort of do some kind of, it's not in person, but sort of, safer at home, but still social distancing thing where, like tomorrow, we're going to have a food drive where you just drive up and pop your trunk, and someone can take the food out of there and put it into a barrel that's going to go to our local food bank. Or after Easter, we dropped off flowers to people who were shut in because of their health, and just wanted them to know that we were thinking about them. Yeah. So we've done a lot of sort of trying to adapt, trying to stay within some secure and safe boundaries. One of the things that you might remember from my time at St. John's is that I spent a lot of time being a scientist, and I still am in a way. I worked for drug companies and environmental companies. And so the science of this is not lost on me at all. But there has to be a way for us to keep our faith alive, even in the midst of this. And the truth is, if you really roll back the clock and look through all of history, there are moments like this that are worse than this, where, Christianity was really under threat, or humanity was really, in trouble. And people kept their faith in ways that were interesting. And life-giving. And so we just want to sort of live into that. And the truth is that we've gotten it right a bunch of times and make some mistakes sometimes too. So yeah.
Yeah, that's a great. As a scientist, you'll know the importance of experimentation.
Yes.
The failures are just as important as the successes in terms of understanding
They
what
really are.
we need to do.
Yep.
So if we're not making mistakes, we're not making any progress in a way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So what do you think is going to, I think that people talk about a return. I have said often that I'm not sure I want to return or recover,
Mm-hmm.
but rather discover.
Sure.
What elements you see that the church can learn from this to maybe shed some of its proudly held views on things or behaviors or ways of doing things that maybe we should loosen up a little bit.
Yeah.
How do you see that?
I mean, I think the truth of any experiment is only borne out as it comes to completion. So I don't really know. It'll be interesting to see. We've at Epiphany, I've preached a lot and we've talked a lot about, and I'm sure you have too, about how much this time feels more like Lent and Good Friday, and that we're giving things up and we're absent than it does Easter. I'm sure you saw the meme on Facebook a month ago, right when people were starting to stay safer at home. Someone bemoaned, "I didn't imagine giving this much up for Lent," right? And
Yes.
like, it was hilarious, but it really is hilarious because that's exactly how I felt.
That was my first letter to the parish when this all started. It started out something to the effect, "I bet you didn't think you were going to give up church for Lent."
Yeah.
So
If it's Lent, if this feels Lenten, or really I think a much more resonant moment is Good Friday. If this feels like there's some absence in our lives and we have to sit with that, even in the fact that we are post-resurrection, right? All of the 2,000 years after Jesus's life are post-resurrection. And so, there's this new life available to us. We have to trust that as things die to us, new life will come out of them. And so as we go through this time that feels like another person that I thought really struck the nail, talked about feeling like they were in the tomb with Lazarus right now, stuck inside. Especially a month ago, it was darker. The weather was worse. It wasn't really clear. Was Jesus coming? And the truth is Jesus is risen, but that doesn't mean that everything's fixed right yet. So the question is, as we are in this moment where it feels like God is a little absent from us, what is going to be the new life that comes out of that? What is the transformation that's going to come out of that? I think some of it will be, let's be honest, Scott, some of it is going to be a retrenchment of stuff that we didn't need. There's going to be some places where we're going right back to the way things were because it was safer then.
mm-hmm.
And some of that's going to be natural. When people are scared, it's great to go back to what you're familiar with. That's okay.
Right.
It may not always be productive, but it'll be okay. And God will be there.
The disciples were somebody who went back after Easter to what they were familiar with, which was fishing, because they were just so
Jesus
lost.
finds them fishing.
So I think some lostness really has to do with the resurrection.
Mm-hmm.
It's part of the readjustment.
Totally. But I think there will also be some retrenchment that we do that will be valuable and life-giving because we've taken a break from it. It'll be like a Lenten discipline that we've stopped doing something and we come back to it and we realize how full it was. I think communion will, and physical assembly and touch will be, as an incarnationalist, as a sacramentalist, as someone who believes in, the world around us, I think that we will realize when we come back how important bodies are and physical things are. And I think we'll really have missed communion. I take your point, though. I don't think it's going to just go back the way it was exactly. I think there are people who are really amazed by the beauty of our morning prayer, of our daily office. In a way, I don't want to get into the wonky stuff, but I really believe I love the Book of Common Prayer as it is, and I think I love the primacy of Eucharist as a weekly worship service. But a lot of people are surprised by how beautiful our daily office is and how they find God in that too, in prayer, in reflection, in the scripture, as well as in communion, but in that part. And so I wonder if there isn't going to be a uptick in the practice of our daily office, maybe Tuesday, Thursday morning or something like that, morning prayer, or, 3 services on a Sunday, the 8 o'clock, which is always going to be spoken Eucharist, the 9 o'clock, which is going to be spoken morning prayer, or maybe those two are reversed, and then a full choral Eucharist service, Beyond that, it's a little harder to tell. There's certainly some real life that's coming from our pastoral relationship building, calling people to check in on them, knocking on your neighbor's door, stuff like that. And because it's life-giving, you would expect it to kind of persist. But it could also be that this crisis has brought something out of people in a way that they really want to share and give. And then, when they're done, that animus, that spirit movement will move on to other ministries. Right. I don't know. So I mean, it's hard to throw darts at the board and guess where things are going to go. But I wonder if this won't create some new opportunities. It certainly will bring the life of the Spirit to the church in ways that we just have to respond to and listen to. And if we miss that's not going to be good. But it could lead to richness.
So I always like to end these interviews by asking everybody who kind of knows and has experienced St. John's, what would your advice be to us as we attempt to leverage our better gifts at St. John's, our unique way of doing things? How could we leverage those not only during this time, but also moving forward to an emerging church?
I mean, I'm a little sad to say it's been a little too long since I've been back to St. John's. I don't even think I remember the flood from the sewer pipe or from the storm drain, whichever it was.
Yeah.
I think that I visited during that construction last, but not since then. And so I'm a little out of touch. I remember St. John's fondly, though, really loving formation and education and being great about that, both of themselves with things like EFM and of others. Keller's work with me as a youth group student, right? It's a long time ago when I was in Keller's youth group, and she still does great work, I think. Those are gifts that St. John's continues to offer to other people. A beautiful physical plant, a wonderful education system that raises up people and forms them into good Christians, into Christians who go out and live their lives. Excuse me. I remember 20 years ago being on the vestry and talking about the position of the campus and how, as part of the construction project, you remember. And one thing that we really appreciated about the way St. John's was and still is it really feels cloistered. Thornhill's not a busy road, but it's not a quiet one either. You really have to kind of wind your way up to get to the campus. And when you get there, the trees and the beauty of the campus and the quiet call you into a different place. And so I wonder, between the wonderful reflective space that's there, the love of music that's rich at St. John's, the formation, the gift for formation that is there, and the beauty of the physical plant. I wonder if those aren't things that get shared with the community more. One thing that I bet will happen, I think it's going to be very interesting, as Governor Newsom talked yesterday about a four-step plan to phase back, and public assembly, like religious experiences, are sort of later. So I wonder, will it happen that as religious assembly is kind of coming back into being, will we be tentative about it and say, okay, guys, we're only going to have 25 people at each service, and so we're going to have more services, and we're going to spread out and stuff like that? Or will people jump back in because they miss it so much? My hunch is that people will be hungry for something. There's going to be if nothing more, there's going to be a whole lot of people who are borne up with grief over this pandemic because they had a near miss or because someone they loved died and they couldn't be there or something like that. And so St. John's having this loving heart is this wonderful opportunity to reach out to the neighborhood and welcome people who just are going to grieve. But it's also, I think, a wonderful time to invite people into reflection on the bigger things of life and to learn and to grow. And St. John's is so good at learning and growing. So I think those gifts are going to, borne out and shared with the world, are going to be wonderful. But I also think, having been at St. John's, having been connected to St. John's for a long time, St. John's is good at listening and responding. The Spirit kind of shifts a different way, and you guys say, "Okay, let's go that way," and see where it leads. So it'd be amazing to discern with you.
Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to do this, Greg. I know you're busy. I know what it's like to be a rector right now, and it's a busy time and a creative time, and I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. It's great to see you, and
glad to do it.
All the best to you and your congregation.
Well, thank you so much. It's a wonderful time to replenish our relationships. If the Trinity teaches us anything, it's that relationship is essential to God and therefore essential to us. And since it was so easy to physically assemble before this pandemic, and that's been taken away from us, or we've foregone that for a little while, I think it's important to stretch out and rebuild relationships that maybe have drifted apart for a little while. So I'm wonderful. I'm glad to, hear good news of you all, and glad to catch up and let you know how I am. So
great. Thank you again, Greg.
Yeah. Thanks, Scott.
Take care.
You too.